Candle. Have you ever noticed how the city feels different at night? Not louder, not quieter, just softer. The sharp edges of the day seem to blur. Footsteps echo longer. Lights glow warmer. And thoughts, those restless thoughts, begin to slow. This story begins on one such evening. In the heart of Holborn, where streets twisted and doubled back on themselves like tangled thread, there stood a small bookshop most people passed without a second glance. Its brick walls were darkened by decades of soot and rain, its windows clouded by age. The sign above the door creaked gently in the wind, its lettering worn nearly smooth by time. Yet every night, just as the city settled into its familiar rhythm of hooves, wheels, and distant voices, a single candle appeared in the window. Inside the shop lived Mr. Thistlewood. He was a bookseller by trade and by nature, a man neither young nor old, shaped more by habit than ambition. His hair, once dark, had softened into gray. His spectacles rested permanently on the bridge of his nose, as though they had simply decided to stay there one day and never leave. He moved through the shop with deliberate care, each motion unhurried. His hands, roughened by years of lifting and shelving books, carried faint ink stains that no amount of washing could remove. They were hands that knew weight and texture, paper and leather, dust and time. The shop was quiet now. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, bending slightly under the burden of countless volumes. Some books were well loved, their spines cracked and softened. Others had not been touched in years, waiting patiently for a reader who might never come. The air held the scent of old paper, binding glue, and candle wax, a smell that never quite left. Mr. Thistlewood stood behind the counter, closing the heavy ledger that marked the end of his day. Numbers sat neatly in their columns, balanced and precise. He nodded to himself, satisfied, though the work had long ago become more ritual than necessity. Then, as he did every evening, he reached beneath the counter and opened a small drawer. Inside lay a single candle. It was not remarkable, plain wax, shorter now than it once had been. Yet he handled it with care, lifting it gently as though it were fragile. He struck a match. For a brief moment, the sharp scent of sulfur cut through the familiar air. The flame flickered, then steadied. He touched it to the wick and watched as the candle came to life. Slowly he placed it in the window. Outside, the glow spilled onto the cobblestones, warm and steady against the cool fog that drifted through the street. The candle did not shine far, did not demand attention, but it was there, and sometimes that was enough. Passers-by moved through the fog, coats pulled tight against the chill. Most walked on without noticing, but some slowed, paused. Faces appeared briefly in the light. Tired faces, thoughtful faces, curious faces. For just a moment they softened. Then they moved on, swallowed once more by the night. Mr. Thistlewood watched from within. He did not wave. He did not call out. He simply observed, feeling a quiet comfort in those fleeting connections. Shared moment, shared warmth. Later, as the hour grew late, he extinguished the candle with a gentle breath. Smoke curled upward like a sigh. He climbed the narrow stairs to the small room above the shop, carrying the quiet of the evening with him. The city outside continued without him. Morning came slowly to Holborn. Pale light crept between buildings, touching chimneys and windows with hesitant fingers. Shutters lifted, doors opened. The city stretched awake. Mr. Thistlewood descended the stairs and unlocked the shop door, the bell above it chiming softly. He breathed in the familiar scent of paper and dust, feeling grounded once more. As he moved to the window, his eyes caught on something unexpected. An envelope. It rested near the base of the glass, as though it had been carefully placed there. The paper was worn, creased along the edges. No stamp, no seal, only words, "To whom the light still burns." He stared at it for a long moment, the quiet stretching around him. Then, slowly, he picked it up. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Thank you for the light you keep in the darkness." Nothing more. No name. No explanation. Yet the words settled deep within him, warming something he hadn't realized had grown cold. He read it again and again. The day passed in a thoughtful haze. Customers came and went. Coins rang softly on the counter. Books changed hands. But the note remained folded in his pocket, its presence steady and reassuring. That evening, when he lit the candle once more, it felt different, brighter, as though it were answering something unseen. The city of quiet kindness. The letter stayed with Mr. Thistlewood longer than he expected. Not in his pocket, not on the counter, but somewhere deeper, where questions tend to linger. 4 days after its arrival, he found himself watching the city more closely, not just seeing it but listening to it. The rhythm of footsteps on stone, the rise and fall of voices carried by fog, the subtle ways people moved when they thought no one was paying attention. Holborn was not a gentle place. It never had been. The streets were narrow, crowded, and impatient. Buildings leaned inward as if they had grown tired of standing apart. Smoke clung to everything. Even kindness, when it appeared, often went unnoticed. Yet now Mr. Thistlewood sensed it everywhere. It was in the way a door was held open a moment longer than required. In the way a coin was pressed quietly into another hand. In the way eyes met, briefly, and softened. The candle had taught him to see. One morning, after opening the shop and arranging a stack of returns that did not truly need arranging, Mr. Thistlewood closed the door behind him and stepped into the street. The air was cool, damp with fog that hovered low and stubborn. He pulled his coat tighter and began to walk. His steps carried him toward Cobbler's Alley. The alley was narrow even by Holborn's standards, tucked between 2 taller buildings that blocked much of the daylight. The sound came before the sight, the steady tap, tap, tap of hammer on leather, sound as reliable as a heartbeat. Inside the cobbler's shop, the air was thick with the scent of leather, wax, and years of work. Shoes lined the walls in various states of repair. Boots with cracked soles, slippers with frayed seams. And in the window, resting carefully on a small stand, a pair of children's shoes, polished, mended, and almost new again. The cobbler looked up as Mr. Thistlewood entered. He was a broad man with shoulders shaped by labor, his hands rough and scarred. Yet his movements were gentle, practiced. He stitched leather the way others might play an instrument. "Morning, Mr. Thistlewood," the cobbler said, not pausing his work. "You're out early." "I find myself curious these days," Mr. Thistlewood replied. "About stories." The cobbler smiled faintly. "This place is full of them." Mr. Thistlewood nodded toward the small shoes in the window. "Those look new." "They were," the cobbler said. "Once." He set his tools aside and wiped his hands on a cloth. "A boy used to come by here, barefoot most days, would stand outside and stare. Never asked for anything. And," Mr. Thistlewood prompted gently, "one morning a woman came in, well-dressed but tired around the eyes. Bought those shoes. Told me to fit them to the boy when he came back. Left before I could ask her name." The image settled quietly between them. "What happened to the boy?" Mr. Thistlewood asked. "He walked different after that," the cobbler said. "Straighter. like someone had reminded him he mattered. Mr. Thistlewood thanked him and stepped back into the alley, the sound of tapping leather following him like an echo. From there, his feet carried him toward the river. The baker's shop sat near the water, warm and alive. Steam fogged the windows, and the smell of fresh bread wrapped itself around him the moment he stepped inside. Shelves were stacked high with loaves, their crusts golden and crackled. The baker greeted him with a nod and a smile, flour dusting his sleeves and beard. "You look like a man chasing something," the baker said. "Perhaps I am," Mr. Thistlewood replied. The baker leaned closer. "Then listen carefully." He spoke of a widow who came each morning, coins counted twice before being placed on the counter, of a loaf made larger than requested, of payment refused, of a handkerchief returned a week later, sewn with care. "There's more hunger than the belly," the baker said quietly. "Some folks just need to be seen." Mr. Thistlewood carried that thought with him as he left, along with a warm loaf tucked beneath his arm. The day unfolded gently. At an inn near the edge of the district, an innkeeper spoke of a traveler whose stay had been paid for by a stranger. At a weaver's workshop, thread and fabric were gifted to a family who could not afford them. At a small park, an old man recalled a coat given away on a freezing morning. The stories shared a shape. Small acts, quiet gestures, no names. By evening, Mr. Thistlewood felt both fuller and more uncertain than before. The city was stitched together by kindness, yes. But who had written the letter? Who had noticed the candle? That night, the fog felt heavier. He lit the candle as usual. The flame steadied, glowing against the glass. Outside, the city moved on. He wondered who might be watching. Sleep came slowly. His dreams were filled with faces he did not know, hands offering and receiving, light passing quietly from one to another. When morning arrived, it did so softly. And waiting beneath the candle was another envelope. This one was smaller, the paper thinner. Inside, just a single line. "Light travels farther than you think." Mr. Thistlewood sat down heavily on the stool behind the counter. The city outside was waking, unaware that something small but meaningful was unfolding behind the glass of an old bookshop window. And somewhere, unseen, someone was still watching the light. The city felt larger now, not because it had changed, but because Mr. Thistlewood had begun to see how many lives moved through it unnoticed. Each street seemed to hold 1,000 stories, each face another unanswered question. The note lay folded carefully in his pocket as he stepped outside that morning. "Light travels farther than you think." The words echoed with each footstep. Fog clung low to the streets, softening edges and muting sound. The gas lamps still burned, their glow pale in the growing daylight. He walked without hurry, letting instinct guide him. His search had no clear direction. There was no name, no address, only a sense that somewhere in this maze of stone and smoke, the answer existed. He returned first to the places he had already visited, hoping repetition might reveal what novelty had not. At the docks, the river moved slowly, dark and heavy. Men shouted to one another over the creak of ropes and the slap of water against wood. A young lad worked among them, carrying crates far too heavy for his thin frame. Mr. Thistlewood approached him gently. "Have you ever seen a candle lit in a bookshop window?" he asked. The boy paused, then nodded. "Every night, sir." "And the notes?" Mr. Thistlewood asked. "Have you seen anyone leave them?" The boy shook his head. "Just the light." That answer followed him through the day. Just the light. At the market, a seamstress with needle-pricked fingers paused when he mentioned the candle. Her eyes softened. "It's a comfort," she said simply. At a narrow side street, An old man leaning on a cane smiled at the question. "Some lights don't belong to anyone," he said. "They belong to everyone." By late afternoon, weariness settled into Mr. Thistlewood's bones. The search was beginning to feel endless. London could hide a single soul too easily. As dusk approached, he wandered without purpose, turning corners he did not recognize, letting the city carry him. That was when he noticed her. She stood across the street, near the mouth of an alley. Butching. Her coat was too thin for the cold, her shoes worn at the edges. A ribbon held her hair back, faded but carefully tied. When their eyes met, she startled. For a moment they simply stood there. Then she turned and ran. Mr. Thistlewood followed, though his steps were slow. He did not chase. He did not call out. He simply walked in the direction she had gone. The alley ended near a small courtyard. Now. Quiet. On the ground near the wall lay a folded piece of paper. He picked it up. Inside just a few words. "I didn't mean to be seen." That night, the candle burned longer than usual. Morning came with a fragile stillness. When Mr. Thistlewood opened the shop, his heart felt oddly light despite the uncertainty. The candle stub had burned low but steady, and beneath it lay another letter. This one longer. "Dear Sir, I was afraid you would be angry. I never meant to intrude. I only wanted to say thank you. Your light makes the city feel kinder." His hands trembled slightly as he read. He understood now. The search was never meant to be about finding. It was about seeing. The city was unusually quiet that morning. Not silent. London was never silent, but softened as though it were holding its breath. Fog drifted low across the cobblestones, blurring the sharp lines of buildings and turning familiar streets into something gentler, almost dreamlike. The sound of distant carts and early footsteps seemed far away, wrapped in layers of mist. Mr. Thistlewood opened the door to his bookshop slowly, the bell above it chiming with its usual soft courtesy. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him, leaning his back against it for a moment longer than usual. The letter was still in his hand. "I only wanted to say thank you. Your light makes the city feel kinder." He read the words again, not because he needed to, but because they felt steady, anchoring, as though they were reminding him that something real had happened, that the quiet connection he had sensed all along had finally found its shape. He crossed the shop and set the letter beside the candle holder on the windowsill. Morning light filtered in, pale and uncertain. Dust motes drifted lazily through the air. The shelves stood as they always had, patient and familiar, their spines worn smooth by time. Yet everything felt changed. For the first time since the letters had begun appearing, Mr. Thistlewood did not feel the need to search. Instead, he waited. The girl returned that evening. He knew she would, not because he expected it, but because the candle burned differently that night. Steadier, as if it too was waiting. Outside, the fog thickened as dusk settled over Holborn. Gas lamps flickered to life one by one, their light reflecting softly on damp stone. The streets slowed, the day folding itself away. Mr. Thistlewood stood behind the counter, pretending to sort papers that did not require sorting. Then he saw her. She stood across the street, just beyond the reach of the candle's glow. Watching the window as though it were something fragile. This time he did not follow her. He opened the door. The bell rang softly, carrying into the street like an invitation rather than an announcement. The girl startled, her eyes widening. For a moment she looked ready to run. Then she hesitated, "It's all right," Mr. Thistlewood said gently. "You're not in trouble." She remained where she was, her hands clenched at her sides. "I won't be angry," he added. "I promise." Slowly, carefully, she stepped closer. Up close, she looked younger than he had imagined. Perhaps 11, maybe 12. Her coat was thin but neatly mended. Her shoes were scuffed but clean. A faded ribbon held her hair back, tied with careful precision. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said quietly. "You didn't," Mr. Thistlewood replied. "You left me a gift." Her brow furrowed. "I didn't have anything else." He smiled. "You gave me understanding. That's no small thing." They stood there for a moment, the space between them filled with candlelight and quiet. "Would you like to come in?" he asked. "It's warmer." She nodded. Inside, the shop wrapped around her like a held breath finally released. Her eyes traveled up the shelves, across the stacks of books, lingering on titles she could not read from where she stood. "It smells nice," she said. "Books have a way of remembering everyone who's ever touched them," Mr. Thistlewood replied. "That's what you're smelling." She smiled faintly. They sat at the small table near the counter. Mr. Thistlewood poured tea into 2 chipped cups, the steam curling gently upward. "My name is Clara," she said at last. "It's good to meet you, Clara." She traced the rim of her cup with one finger. "I didn't think you'd notice me." "I think I always did," he said. "I just didn't know who I was noticing." She looked up at that. "The candle," she said. "It helped me." "How?" She thought for a moment. "When my mother passed, everything felt dark, even during the day. I used to walk at night because sleep wouldn't come. And then I saw your window." Her voice was steady but careful. "It felt like someone was awake," she continued. "Like the city hadn't forgotten me." Mr. Thistlewood listened without interrupting. "I started leaving notes because I wanted to give something back," she said. "I thought if the light helped me, maybe it helped others too." "It did," he said softly. She exhaled, as though she had been holding her breath for weeks. They spoke for a long time after that. About books she had never owned but always loved. About the streets she knew better than anyone her age should. About the people who had helped her when they didn't have to, and the ones she hoped to help someday. When she finally stood to leave, the night had grown deep and still. "Will you keep lighting the candle?" she asked. "Yes," Mr. Thistlewood said without hesitation. "As long as it's needed." She nodded, satisfied. As she stepped back into the fog, she turned once more. "Thank you," she said. "No," he replied gently. "Thank you." The candle burned every night after that. But now it was no longer alone. Sometimes a flower appeared on the windowsill. Sometimes a folded note, not for him but for whoever needed it next. Sometimes nothing at all, which felt just as meaningful. Mr. Thistlewood continued his routines. He shelved books, balanced ledgers, polished the counter, lived quietly above the shop. But something had shifted. He noticed how people lingered longer now. How strangers spoke more softly near the window. How children paused, pointed, smiled. The light had become a meeting place without words. Years passed. Clara grew older, taller, stronger. She visited less often, then not at all, but the candle remained. And sometimes, just sometimes, Mr. Thistlewood would see a young girl pause across the street, watching the light with the same quiet awe Clara once had. He understood then that kindness does not belong to anyone. Moves, passes, Wait. On one final winter evening, long after Mr. Thistlewood's hands had grown slower and his steps more careful, the candle burned low in the window. Snow fell gently outside, softening the city even further. Inside, the bookshop was quiet. Mr. Thistlewood sat in his chair, a blanket over his knees, the familiar smell of paper and wax surrounding him. His eyes rested on the flame, steady and warm. He smiled, because the light no longer needed him. It would always find its way. Take a slow breath. The city is quiet now. The candle still burns. And somewhere someone feels less alone. Sleep gently.